Hi, welcome back to part 7, where we're going to focus on the deployment of Databricks and data lake files incrementally using Azure DevOps Pipeline. If you're new, make sure you check out my previous videos from part 1, 2, and 4 in particular, and also part 6. And subscribe or like this video, and because that will be very appreciated. As shown in this illustration, we're just going to focus on the deployment of the content within Data Lake and Databricks using DevOps Pipeline. We're going to do incremental updates, meaning if you make changes to your existing files in DevOps repo, you can just incrementally make those changes in the environment that you're targeting for deployment. Okay. Now from here, there are two prerequisites to make sure that it works. Since we're going to use service principal of the DevOps, so service connection of the DevOps for inserting or adding files into Data Lake and Databricks, we need to make sure the service principal has storage block data contributor on the Data Lake in question, and also contributor role in Databricks for the principal in question. All right, let's get to the demo. Welcome to my Azure DevOps. Here is my DevOps pipeline, which I will create a new pipeline in a second. First thing first, I'm going to go to my Azure portal and to my test environment, essentially the environment where I will deploy my codes into. And I will make sure my service principal has the right access. And to do that, first I'm going to go check my Databricks. And I'll go to access control. And when I go to role assignments, I want to make sure my service principal, which is SP DevOps Pipeline. This is the same service principal used by DevOps Service Connection. And I do have service contributor access in here. Cool. The next one is I want to make sure my service principal has access in the data lake. I go to the data lake itself and I click access control in role assignments. I want to make sure that I have the storage block data contributor RBAC role on my service principal. You need to have this. By having contributor, it's not enough. You need to have storage block data contributor, because contributor, this one, gives you access at a service level, whereas the storage block data contributor gives you access on the block, which is on the containers in here level. So it's a lower level access. Make sure you need to have this one. All right, so now we have the access. I'm just going to show you that I have my Databricks here. I have two environments, and in my Azure repos, I have some files, dummy files in Databricks and also in Data Lake. In my Databricks here, I have two folders, DBFS file. DBFS stands for Databricks File System, and notebooks. I'm basically gonna deploy these two dummy notebooks into the Databricks workspace in test environment from dev, from this repo, and the DBFS files. I will deploy these two CSVs into the Databricks file system in test environment. Okay. For the data lake, I have this input folder, which again, I have two dummy CSV files. I will deploy the whole folder here in test environment. And what happened going forward is if you are changing the code base, which is changing here, and if you need to deploy that into test environment, that will just happen automatically because you have a pipeline. And as long as there are changes, you can just trigger that pipeline to make the change automatically later. Now, what does the pipeline look like? Now let's go to my Visual Studio Code, where I will show you the YAML file. This is my YAML file. This is my part 7, Databricks, Data Lake YAML. The top here, manual trigger. This is the Microsoft hosted agent. I just have one stage here, this test, because typically you have a dev, test, and so on environments. and you build something on dev and you want to deploy it into test. And I've got something in dev, and that's also already in the repository in Azure DevOps repo. Now I want to deploy that into test environment. 3 tasks really on here, and you can see the first one here is just a PowerShell, CLI task to upload file into Data Lake. This is the task where we're gonna upload the input Data Lake folder into this environment. And similarly, for the next bit here, this is where I'm gonna deploy Databricks notebooks into the Databricks workspace in test environment. So deploy this whole folder notebooks here. And the last task here is basically deploying the DBFS files folder here to the test environment Databricks workspace. Bear in mind that we've got a bunch of parameters here, and this is all set in the DevOps library as variable group. If we go back to the pipeline and if you click the library, you need to make sure you have the right variables in the common variable group here. So what we need is the Databricks name. Again, please pause this video if you need to sort of record this information here. In the Databricks name, you will need the subscription ID, tenant ID, the service principal information, which is here. So DevOps service principal, application ID, DevOps service principal secret. If you not clear how to get this information, please check my part 2 video. This is essentially you need to go to Azure Active Directory and app registration to get the details. But check part 2 video on setting up service connection. All those details will be revealed there. The same with the subscription ID and the tenant ID. You should be able to find them in my part 2 video. Tenant ID is in Azure Active Directory. Subscription ID is the same. And I think we'll need the resource group name as well in here. Okay. So just to double check, we need to make sure, we have the service principal, application ID, the secret, resource group name, the Databricks name in test, subscription ID, tenant ID, resource group location. And here you can see in this task, this is where this is gonna deploy the notebooks folder into Databricks path notebooks. Similarly, from the platform Databricks DBFS files, this is gonna deploy the DBFS files. So deploying Databricks files into Databricks file system. And the target location is just basically root and then DBFS files. All right. And one caveat as well, if you want to make sure you have, you can use these tasks, and you need to make sure you have installed the marketplace extension for Databricks. If you're not sure what that is, please check out my part 1 video. All right, back to the pipeline view where I'm now going to create a new pipeline. Okay, now create a new pipeline based on Azure Repos Kit, Learn DevOps project, and then I'll pick an existing YAML. I'm going to pick part 7 and continue, and I will just click that and then save. As usual, I will edit this. I want to rename this to something more appropriate. From here, I'm just going to pick my YAML name, and I'll just drop that there, and yeah, looks good. For the variables, I want to make sure I add my comment and also my TST, because this is the environment I'm going to deploy my codes into. I will just save now. Okay, if I go back to my pipelines, click all, I will now run the pipeline. There's only one stage, so there's nothing to worry about that. I click run. And I think because this is the first time we created this, we need to assign permission to the environment test. Click permit, and then let it run its course. And let's just give it a couple of minutes to run this. All right, so deployment is now complete. We just check what's going on here. It's going to upload files into Data Lake. It will, log in and actually upload some files, deploy some Databricks notebooks, and they also deploy some files into Databricks file system before it completes its task. And just to show you what's happening in my data lake, this is my test data lake. It initially was empty. If I refresh, now it's been deployed with this folder input from the repository. And in Azure Databricks, this is my test Azure Databricks. If I go to my workspace, I should see these two dummy notebooks deployed. That's it for part 7 video, how to deploy Databricks and data lake files with DevOps Pipeline. Hope you enjoyed the video so far. Like and subscribe as always. If not, I'll see you in part 8. See you there.